Good afternoon and welcome back. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones. Please welcome Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, Melissa Bradley, Ai-jen Poo, and Diego. Please welcome Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, Melissa Bradley, Ai-jen Poo, and Diego Mariscal.
Hello, my friend. Good to see you. How are you? So good to see you. Hey, Diego. Oh, man, you got matching shoes. Man,
Yes.
very, very fashionable.
Statement.
Nice to see you. Well, I'm very excited to introduce you to these amazing panelists who have a lot to say in the time that we have, and I want to get right into it. You know, Melissa, when you first sought a loan for your business, and I want you to tell everybody a little bit about that, you were told you had 3 strikes against you. You were black, you were a woman, and the person behind the desk said she didn't know any successful black women in finance. So tell us how you heard that and what you did with that, and about representation in finance, and what's the impact of that, besides personally for you and your career, but more generally for the industry and society.
Well, thank you for having me. I love Nashville. You know, I think when that happened to me, luckily, my mom automatically popped into my head because it could have gone really, really well or really, really badly. And so I said, thank you very much. And I left and I went down the elevator. And when I got to the bottom, I said, if I can do some things that no one else who looks like me has to experience that, I will. And luckily, I went on to start the business anyway. I sold it 18 months later. I became an angel investor and then a venture capitalist. And now I run an accelerator, what we call for new majority entrepreneurs. We have 3 funds. We've had 3 exits, and we have facilitated over almost $1 billion in new revenue by our entrepreneurs. And I would say, to answer your question, I think the representation is key. I spent a lot of my time in the world of venture capital, which means you're betting somebody else's money. And so there's a huge amount of risk and responsibility. And oftentimes it makes people very risk averse. And if you're risk averse, you tend to really narrow the box in terms of what you think is bettable, what is worthwhile, and what is going to be successful. Because oftentimes some people are operating out of fear, and we know that when you operate out of fear, you don't see the whole picture. And so in the world of venture capital, women and people of color have been historically marginalized because they don't see people who look like them who've been successful. Savetri is in the audience, who has Resilia, one of the most fun VC-backed black women in the tech space doing amazing work. But until you get to see those images, and they're more than just the one, it's really hard to have people say, oh, I'm willing to bet on you because there is a clear signal effect and track record. And so I think it's important for those of you who may be the only one, the only woman, the only person who cares about a certain issue, to basically say, screw them, and find a way. Because if you put yourself out there, I found that I attracted a whole bunch of people, and I think now people now care about black and brown folks, right? The new majority is not only the fastest growing demographic in the country, but black women were the fastest growing start of entrepreneurs post-COVID. Over 1 million businesses and over 40% were black women. So we're very clear about language. We don't say minority, we say new majority, because all those things around language and data send a signal effect that oftentimes is irreversible until folks like you stand up and say, that is not the right path.
Well, that's an incredible story, and as you know better than most, it still is an uphill climb. I think the last figures I saw were, like, of all the sort of venture capital investments, 1.9% went to women-owned, women-run firms, and it's an even smaller percentage for black women. So it's a constant campaign almost to convince people, not only do you belong, but you're thriving, you're succeeding. And what are some of the strategies you've used to try to, break through either the implicit or the explicit hesitancy or outright opposition?
So the one thing that I believe in data. I'm a finance major. 2 + 2 is always 4. American history changes depending on who's the narrator. So I like to stick with data and things that are factual. And so I have the privilege to be an alumni and a professor at Georgetown University. And so we do a lot of research around black and brown entrepreneurs. And when we're able to put that data out there, it starts to change people's perception. So for example, did you know that it cost $250,000 more at the very least for a black or brown entrepreneur to start the same exact business as a white peer? So if a black woman shows up with $1 million business and a white gentleman shows up with $1 million business, very different journeys, which now has helped many VCs say, I can't value the companies the same way because the journey is apples and oranges, even if they're both talking about a tech platform. We also realized that black businesses last at least 8.5 years. That's significant because 60% of all businesses fail within 5 years. But what's interesting is they're surviving with no correlation to a growth in revenue or access to capital. So imagine if those businesses had been invested. In a place like DC, where I live, we would have 0 unemployment because black and brown businesses hire black and brown people. And if investors were smart, they would go with the business that have longevity, no disrespect, but not a lot of these platform companies who are billion-dollar investment and have yet to make a profit.
Well, it always surprised me. Those billion-dollar tech companies never made a profit, but kept getting, all kinds of investment. My father was a small businessman. He didn't live long enough to see that, but I could just imagine his total consternation. Like, what do you mean? They're getting investments and they don't even turn a profit. Well, we'll come back to you. Now, I want to turn next to Aijen, who is a friend of mine, full disclosure, who has been working so diligently and successfully for a long time. She has led a movement advocating for the domestic work sector. And she often describes that as the work that makes all other work possible. So you began, Aijen, your activist work over 25 years ago, right when you were out of college. I think a lot of the CGI students would like to hear about that transition. And at that time, there wasn't much of any attention on domestic workers' rights. So how did you get on this journey where you decided you were going to literally devote your working life to advocating for domestic workers? And how did you create this organization that is now in the vanguard of trying to make these changes?
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. What an honor. So I would say this, that I was raised by really strong women, and I thought they walked on water. My mom and my grandmother, I just saw them doing everything in the home and then going out and working, and I assumed as a little girl that because I could see them doing everything, empowering everything in our household, that they would be women like them would be in positions of power and decision making in the world. And I think as I grew older, I realized that that just wasn't the case, that women were actually disproportionately in positions of vulnerability and abuse, and underrepresented in positions of power and decision making. And when I was in school, I saw that play out. In New York City, I saw the ways in which this huge global city was powered by the invisible work of caregivers, of nannies, of house cleaners, of home care workers, who were doing the work inside of people's homes that literally made everything else possible, made it possible for people to go to law firms, investment banks, media empires. And I started listening to their stories, and really early on, I heard about a case of a woman who was trafficked to New York City by some diplomats, and this is an issue that you worked on as Secretary of State. She was brought here by some employers who essentially controlled her passport and paid her $500 a month to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week as a live-in nanny. And she was being severely abused. She wasn't allowed to go to church. She wasn't allowed any freedom of mobility. And she was afraid because she didn't have her passport. And so together with some women from a church, we were able to help her escape and learn her rights. And in the process of helping her learn her rights and find legal representation, we realized that in the United States, domestic workers actually have very limited rights because they were excluded from some of the most basic rights that most of us take for granted when we go to a job every day, from protection from discrimination and harassment to overtime protections. There were some basic exclusions that are part of a legacy of slavery and racism in this country. In the 1930s, when our labor laws were put into place, two groups of workers, farm workers and domestic workers, who are mostly black, were excluded from those protections. And so that led me on an effort to bring together as many domestic workers as possible to think about what we could do to change that. And what we realized was that we had to change the laws. If the laws excluded us, we had to get included and protected. And instead of going, though, top down, what we decided to do was get domestic workers together. And so we organized a convention, brought about 250 domestic workers who spoke 7 different languages, had simultaneous interpretation. Everybody shared their stories, and we came up with a list of 25 points of the kinds of rights and protections that they felt they needed in order to feel protected and safe and dignified at work. And that platform got translated into the first New York Domestic Workers Bill of Rights that we advocated for 7 years, and finally won in 2010. New York became the first state in the country to pass a Bill of Rights. And today, today, 11 states and 4 cities have passed bills of rights, and our organization now has a community of over 400,000 domestic workers and growing. And we've introduced federal legislation, and we're fighting hand in hand with family caregivers, people who need care and support, like people with disabilities and older adults, child care advocates, for a care economy that supports this work that makes all their work possible, including the workers.
Well, I have to say, we had some questions in the town hall this morning, and I think they have also been raised in various panels about how you make change, how you overcome obstacles, and there is no substitute for persistence and for hard work and for meeting people where they are, as you did with those early workers you championed. And it is so important to persevere in the face of setbacks and disappointments. And I know you have faced your fair share of obstacles. So maybe share one setback and one success to give our students an idea of how you persevere and build on that.
Well, I'll tell one story that was both a setback and a success. So for the past 2 years, we have been part of a growing coalition called Care Can't Wait that has been fighting for an economic agenda in Washington that makes childcare more affordable and accessible to everyone, that makes aging and disability care more affordable and accessible, and improves the quality of jobs for the care workers who are doing that work, and to establish a national paid family and medical leave program so that you don't have to worry about losing your income if you need to take care of yourself or a family member. And this is an issue that Secretary Clinton has worked on for so long. So we've been fighting for that together, and we, coming out of the pandemic, had more momentum than ever. We had support from the White House, support from Congress, and we even passed through the House of Representatives a bill called the Build Back Better Act that included transformational investments in the care economy, literally game-changing. And we were not successful in getting those investments through the Senate, and it was incredibly heartbreaking. We came a couple of senators short of the largest ever investment in the history of the United States in the care economy, and in jobs that would directly benefit women and women of color. And I can't tell you what it felt like to come so close and yet not succeed. And I think what ended up happening, though, is that the course of the campaign, we built more momentum, more allies, more partnership, more trust and relationship that is powering this work forward than I ever could have imagined 5 years ago. We are working with businesses. Everyone who used to disagree now is working together. And I think that what I realized in my mourning of the loss was that actually we are winning. The fact that we got that bill through the House is a fundamental building block to winning. And that it wasn't our time yet, but our time is literally right around the corner. And the momentum we have right now is undeniable. And we have a plan to make care a defining issue of the 2024 elections, and we have literally hundreds of organizations joining us every single week, and we've turned it into momentum and kind of an eyes on the prize moment, and a reminder that when you organize and persevere, to your point, there is no stopping you, and I believe we will win.
Well, I love the phrase care economy because whether people want to admit it or not, caring is at the base of the economy, as you say, enabling people to go to work, enabling people to themselves have dignity in the jobs that they do that enable others to go out and support the economy. And that's true for people with disabilities, Diego. And you founded Together International, 2GI, which is a business accelerator focused solely on founders with disabilities. So I'd love for you to tell us your story. What inspired you? What led you to work with entrepreneurs? What impact do you think there will be to have an increase in founders with disabilities in the workforce and in the economy, because you're really, doing something that it desperately was needed, but not necessarily really understood.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question. So I'm going to start in the beginning, very beginning. So I was born in the States by accident. My parents, who are both Mexicans, were shopping for baby stuff, and I was born 6 months and a half into my mom's pregnancy. She jokes and says that I've always been really stubborn. Even before I was born, I wanted to get out quickly. And as a result of that, I have cerebral palsy. As you can see, that's partly why I use the crutches. And growing up, I was fortunate enough to have supportive parents, that really believed in education, really believed in equal opportunities, especially my brother who didn't have a disability. We had the same expectations for both of us. but then quickly realized that beyond the infrastructural barriers, beyond the limitations that society puts in front of us, it's really the perception of disability, the biggest barrier, right? In the US, for example, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was a huge piece of legislation that improved physical barriers and entryways for folks with disabilities, and yet the unemployment rate continues to be one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, almost double the rate of non-disabled people. And so coming in, I thought I wanted to do international relations. That's why I went to DC American University with Professor Bradley was my professor at one point. And so really looking at, okay, there's been situations and there's been policies that have been tried before, and yet none of them seem to be working. At the same time, as people with disabilities, we have to solve problems. From the moment we wake up, we have to figure out how do we get dressed, how we drive, how we communicate. And so coming from Mexico, from a different culture, from an entrepreneurship culture, because I grew up in Monterrey, Mexico, which is very entrepreneurial, I really saw the similarities between the disability experience and the entrepreneurship experience, and wanted to catapult that into really utilizing it as a way to change the way people view disability. And so far, we've been able to support 500 entrepreneurs all around the world. 70 of them have gone through our business accelerator, raising more than $41 million from investment. Thank you. So really the leading accelerator for founders with disabilities, and I'm really proud of that change because I want to make sure that folks feel a sense of pride and identity, and they're not successful in spite of their disability. They're successful because of their disability and the resiliency that comes along.
So Together International just celebrated its 10th anniversary. Congratulations. What do you wish you knew when you were starting out 10 years ago? And if you could speak to the college-age Diego, like out there, who was dreaming up 2GI in your dorm room, I think, can you also share with us some memorable setbacks and successes and what you learned from them?
Yeah, so it was really hard. I tell people we are the 10-year overnight success because it's taken a long time to get to where we are. I would say that today is actually a very special day. I'm actually very honored to be here. I know you knew her well, a friend of ours, Judy Human, passed away today. So it's really, really sad, but I'm really honored to be here. I'm celebrating her in spirit. And she was a really well-known disability rights activist, considered the mother of the disability rights movement. And oftentimes we would have disagreements on, I wanted to pursue entrepreneurship. She thought I should do more traditional, workforce and just get a job and learn some skills. And I think learning to respect each other, we would talk every day. So that's why, we became really close. And I think that being able to respect each other's disagreements while still understanding that each of us is trying to move the movement forward in a way that makes a significant impact, that's the biggest lesson, right? Being able to listen to each other, especially different generations that have different perspectives and points of views. And even though we had different perspectives, it wouldn't have been because of her support and because of her mentorship that together wouldn't have been where it is today. So really, really grateful for that. And my advice to college students would be trust in yourself, believe in yourself, because there were moments when she wasn't the only one, when there were people more experienced and more senior than me saying, this isn't gonna work, this isn't where you should be spending your time with. And trusting myself and understanding that I knew what I was doing and that I knew that I was going on the right path really allowed us to succeed. And so I think the common thread here is perseverance, right? And so that would be my advice to folks in the room.
Thank you so much, Diego. You know, Diego mentioned his great mentor and a friend of mine, Judith Heumann, who was a force of nature. I mean, she was such an advocate for the rights of people with disability, and she was strong-minded. And I love the fact that even though you had a close relationship with her and you were a colleague as well as a mentee, you also always asked whether it was right for you. Because sometimes, you know, when you have a mentor, or you have somebody you look up to, somebody you ask advice from, you know, you can get a little bit overwhelmed because they are more experienced and they have strong opinions. So Melissa, I want to ask you, did you have a mentor? Did you have somebody that you could turn to, or were you making it up as you went?
A little bit of both. I would say I had, I call them challengers.
You what?
Had challengers. So when I was at school, at undergrad, I had many folks who wanted me to get a job, who thought that this idea of being vocal around systemic racism and lack of opportunity was just a waste of time, and that I would never be successful. And so I think they have helped to mold me. I think my biggest mentor is my mom, who actually was a domestic worker, who dropped out of school to take care of her grandmother, because that's what you do. She is 95 years old now. And I remember one day, she came on with this map. She wanted to make sure that if anybody knows, anybody who comes from a historically marginalized community, your parents always say you have to be 150% better than everybody else. And so we had this map of all the presidents, and I was like, well, they're all white men. And she said, well, that's what they are for right now. And she said, do not allow whatever you see to determine where you think you can be. And that was huge, because I did not become president. I did work in 2 presidential administrations. And it came full circle when I had a chance. I served under Clinton and Obama, and she had a chance to meet Obama, and she said, I've been waiting for you all my life, and he said, thank you for waiting. And I share that because I think whoever has been in my life, whether they've challenged me or supported me, I think not only is there perseverance and resilience, but there's also patience. There's an amazing book, it's called 4,000 Weeks, sorry. And it is about the fact that life is a set amount of time, and we don't never know when it's going to go, when our time is done. But how do we really focus intentionally every single day to leave where we are better than when we came? And so it doesn't necessarily create a sense of urgency, but it creates a level of strategy that we need to be thoughtful around. What are we doing every single day? And I mean, I love Diego, and I think when he was talking, the other thing I would say is none of us are perfect. And we are all, is what I say, #work in progress. And so we have to give ourselves patience as well, that we're going to make mistakes, we're going to screw up, people around us are going to screw up, but it doesn't end there. And we wake up the next day, God willing, and have an opportunity to do it again.
Absolutely. I think that's such important advice. And now I want to ask each one of you, as we are wrapping up, as you think about the communities that you've been working with, that you've been leading in a way, breaking down barriers, what do you want companies, governments, organizations to know so they can better represent and support the unique needs and experiences of employees, of entrepreneurs, of workers from underrepresented groups? And so, Diego, let me start with you.
Yeah, so the key in the disability community, and you know this, but any of us can become a part of this community, right? Disability is the largest minority in the world, 1 billion people plus around the world. And, you know, we could go out right now, get hit by a bus, and you're part of the club, right? And if we age, all of us, right? we just were the lucky ones that got into the club a little earlier. And so disability really affects us all, right? So when you're thinking about disability in your projects and your initiatives, it is not us versus them. It's really all of us. And by supporting the disability community, you're making the world a better place for everybody, not just for the largest minority in the world.
That's such an important point, because also as people age, many people start to have mobility issues, hearing issues, things that they didn't experience. So you're right. I mean, the universe of people who should both understand and support people with disabilities is a really large one. That's a great point to make. Exactly. So Aijen, what about you?
Well, building off of that, I want to ask a question. How many of you are caring for somebody in your family, a loved one maybe, or have had the experience of providing care for somebody, maybe an older person, a loved one with a disability? Any of you? Okay. And this is our workforce. And our workplaces aren't really designed to support caregiving, right? Am I right? And so I think, that's right. So I think to the extent that we are reimagining and reinventing workplace culture, we just have to remember there are 53 million working family caregivers out there. And if we create workplaces that work for them, it just means we unleash so much more human potential, creativity, and brilliance into the universe. And I just think of this, did you all see the movie Hidden Figures? Mm-hmm. My friend Franklin Leonard always says the genius of that film is that you saw all of the obstacles that the Black women in NASA faced when they were trying to do their work. Just barrier after barrier, and they still managed to take us to the moon. Imagine if those barriers didn't exist, what might be possible for society and the problems we would solve and the potential we would unleash. So I think thinking about it from that way of removing obstacles is really about unleashing so much power for all of us.
I'm so glad you said that, because this is not an either or. This is a both and. The more we support people who are underrepresented, the more we open more doors of opportunity. It's not a zero-sum game. There are a lot of people who feel like if, Melissa gets ahead, somehow that's taking away from me. No, you're growing the opportunities for everybody. So, Melissa, your last words here.
I think everything that they have said, and one thing to be mindful of is that change is not transactional, it's transformational. Excuse me, so where you are right now, don't worry about how much money you need to get the work done. Don't worry about, do you have enough people who are going to show up for a demonstration? Just know, are you having the right relationships to either have arguments or disagreements about how you're going to get there, to have people that are going to be there no matter what, and that at the end of the day, there is not an institution that's going to change any of this, because an institution is comprised of nothing but of individuals. And so it has to be, how do I connect on a daily basis with people who agree with me and disagree, both to make me better and to be able to advance the ideas and the projects and the strategies that we actually care about. Do not make it transactional. Do not keep score. Keep relationships. Keep a level of integrity, and continue to build trust.
That's a great, great way to end. Thank you all so much, this terrific panel. So follow me out this way. We're going to go out this way. Okie dokie. Great. And then I want to take you back, take you to the green room.
Hi, I'm Shrey Venkat from the CGIU class of 2021 and a current commitment mentor. I'm also a junior at Georgetown University, majoring in global health, and the founder and CEO of the nonprofit Nest for Us. Despite the fact that more than half the global population is comprised of females, society continuously forces them to give away their power, making them feel like they're inferior to overwhelming male leadership. But it doesn't have to be that way. As a young female entrepreneur of color, I mobilize women and girls to stand up against racial and gender-based injustices worldwide by supporting female-led enterprises and establishing change networks committed to amplifying the voices of those who are continually and coercively silenced by society. It's imperative that we position gender equity at the center of all solutions to our world's most pressing issues, and it takes all of us to make this a reality. After all, gender equity is not a women's issue, it's a human issue.
Please welcome Dr. Chelsea Clinton, Reshma Sujani, Elissa Russell, and Kapama KP Yelpala.
Hi guys, so nice to see you all. Such nice music to walk out to too, I have to say. I'm so just energized by that previous conversation and so looking forward to this one and so grateful to all of you for being here with us in Nashville and at Vanderbilt. And admittedly, Elissa, I wonder if we could start with you since you're a CGIU alum. And I hope that your fellow panelists understand then why thank you, Reshma, starting with you. I wonder if you could share kind of what you've been up to since CGIU, what Readi is, why you decided to start it, and what you hope it'll achieve.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here. I want everyone to know that, in fact, in 2019-2020, I was scheduled to be in Edinburgh in Scotland, and then COVID shut it all down. And here I am at the homecoming on the stage. This could be you, so prepare yourselves. I'm telling you, prepare yourselves. Anything is possible. So I run the company called Readi, and we are workforce training and virtual reality. I train 16 to 26-year-olds. I have 10 industries and over 200 simulations built. So yeah, I'm trying to change the world one young adult at a time, giving everyone equity and workforce opportunities.
Great. KP, it's so nice to see you.
Really nice to see you, Chelsea.
I need to disclose, I feel like KP's a really good friend, and I just always want to be honest. The other people I've been up on stage with are clearly my parents, so you already know I'm related, so I didn't have to disclose that, but I want to just acknowledge how great it is to share a stage with my good friend KP. KP, I wonder, a similar question for you. Could you share a little bit about In On Health, why you decided to start it, kind of how your own life experience informed the decision to start In On Health, and what's it up to, and what do you hope it will continue to do?
Great, thanks, Chelsea. I'm so pleased to be here with all of you and to share space with some other great friends that I'm making here today too. So In On Health is a company I founded because really, for me, I've been really passionate about access to healthcare issues my whole life. My family are Ghanaian immigrants to the U.S. I was born here, and so that journey started for me in global health. But as the son of immigrant parents, I realized we had a lot of health equity issues here at home. And so I launched In On Health to close gaps in care for multicultural populations and really help them be empowered with information that they could understand to take care of them and their loved ones. I've been on quite a journey, so I think it's appropriate to share that last year, and Chelsea knew this, she helped me on this journey. As I was in the middle of an investment round for my company, I found out that I had stage 2 prostate cancer, moderately aggressive. And, our company had so much traction, and we'll talk about this later, but there's certain challenges I was also facing as a person of color, but then to also become a statistic in the work I was doing. Like, my company was sending out information to people on prostate cancer screening. So it's like I became a statistic in my own, like, what I was trying to solve, right? I'm really happy to say I'm cancer-free. And that I really, something Melissa was saying really resonated with me. I have young children that are 12 and 10 and a beautiful wife and a loving family. And all of that just gives another sense of urgency about why this work is and why I continue to persist. And I want to acknowledge that while I was in that challenge, Chelsea was one of the people that I spoke to and that really kind of gave me that encouragement I needed.
Well, I think we've heard, last night and throughout today, the importance of community and being, in community, kind of doing important work, which often correlates to hard work, with people that we not only kind of share a sense of mission and purpose with, but also really like, and either are our friends or can become our friends. And I am so thankful to count Reshma also as a good friend, and grateful that she is here with us. And Reshma is a now serial entrepreneur, tackling a number of big challenges in our country. And I wonder if you could share both why you started kind of Girls Who Code, your first kind of big enterprise, and then kind of why you now are tackling a different challenge. Because you could have just kept stewarding Girls Who Code. We haven't exactly solved the gender tech gap in our country or anywhere. And yet you knew you'd set that organization up for success. Someone else could lead it, and you needed to redirect your time, energy, attention, platform to another big issue in our country.
Yes, trust me, I think about this all the time. Why am I doing this again? So in 2010, I decided to run for United States Congress. My parents had also come here as refugees from Uganda, and I had this deep love for this country. I wanted to be a public servant so I could give back to the country that had literally saved my parents' life. I graduated $300,000 in student loan debt and got a job at one of those fancy law firms, thinking I'd be paying off that debt in a year or two. That never happened. And so I kind of woke up at 33 in this job in finance and thinking, is this it? Is this the rest of my life? I'm not serving anyone. I'm not helping anyone. So I decided to run for United States Congress against an 18-year incumbent in a Democratic primary, because I thought that was a great idea. I raised $50,000 from Indian aunties that were just so happy an Indian girl was running for office. I got crushed, not even close, less than 19% of the vote. I was broke. I was humiliated. I had pissed off everybody in the Democratic establishment for not waiting my turn. But in that journey, when I was running for office, I would go to New York City public schools, and I'd go into computer science classes and robotics labs, and I would just see lines and lines and lines of boys, not a girl in sight. And I remember thinking, I knew that Silicon Valley was a boys' club, but I didn't know that club started in high school, and it pissed me off. And I kept thinking about my father's voice. My father would say, Beta, you have three choices. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Right? Because he wanted me to get a job.
Hold on, I think we need to pause. There were lots of knowing chuckles in the audience, Reshma.
Right? Because they were those are good paying jobs. You can march up into the middle class. And in 2010, so were those jobs in technology. They paid $120,000 a year. So not seeing girls of color upset me and made me want to do something about it. So I started Girls Who Code when I didn't know how to code, nor did I bother to learn at that point, because I thought that was a way to get an entire generation of young people to march up into the middle class. 10 years later, we've taught over 600,000 girls to code, half of which are under the poverty line or are Black and Latina. And these are girls that are going to find a solution to COVID, cancer, and climate. We've done it. We've built the pipeline. But then, why am I doing what I'm doing now? Which is, again, building a movement of moms to fight for paid leave and affordable childcare, was because during the pandemic, I remember sitting there and watching my students, many of those same Black and brown girls who were on their way to get their degree in computer science, decide that they couldn't, or I shouldn't say decide, but have to not get their degree because their mothers were essential workers and they had to stay home from college and take care of their siblings. You saw that two-generational cycle of poverty really put into place because we had a broken structure of care. And I realized that I was never going to finish the fight for gender equality until I finished the fight for their moms. Because all of us as women, non-binary, we will be at some point in the workforce, and we will be mothers and workers, still doing 2/3 of that care, and we will be living in a country that doesn't have paid leave, that doesn't have affordable childcare, that still pays moms 58 cents on every dollar, and we will never actually get there until we solve this problem. And I don't know about you, but far too long, like I bought into that whole thing about, well, if you just got a mentor, if you girl bossed your way to the top, if you tried a little harder, you too can have the corner office. And it was all a lie. We were never going to solve gender inequality until we solved the structural inequality that so many women and parents, and especially women of color, face.
And I think, importantly, Reshma, it's the structural inequality of the absence of kind of sufficient protections, including, though not solely paid leave, but also, though, kind of is the structure of kind of cultural and social norms. I actually thought about you the other day. My middle son was homesick, and for all sorts of other family reasons, I just rushed our dog to the hospital. Like, my other two kids were in school, and so my husband and I were like bouncing back and forth between like home and meetings. And I had an early meeting. I rushed home so my husband could rush off to a meeting. Then he was rushing home so I could rush off to an event. Then he was rushing home so like I could rush to the hospital, check on our dog. And I rushed home and I walked in and I could hear all these people on the Zoom say to my husband, and I love my husband. He's a wonderful partner. He's a wonderful parent. He's like my best friend in the whole world, and I wouldn't change a thing about him. But I walked in, and Reshma, I could hear the comments on the Zoom of the people that he was in this now virtual meeting with instead of being in person, because he could thankfully do this one from home. And they were like, "You are setting such a good example. Like, thank you for being such a good dad and still showing up." And I'm like, no one says that to women.
Thank you for doing your job. Right, never.
Right, like never. Like, no, like whenever I'm like, oh, I'm at home because I'm with my kid, they're like, yeah, okay, so we're talking about what? And that just the tone of voice, the level of like approbation and the number of adjectives and adverbs, I was like, well, yep. And I'm a white, very privileged woman, right? And you're like, well, exactly. Elissa, I think this is actually a really good segue, back to Readi, because I really think all the students here would be interested in why you focus on 16 to 26, why I know you do have a particular kind of energy towards supporting kind of the upskilling and reskilling of women to be able to kind of have more job security, more opportunity for themselves, and to Reshma's point, also in a real kind of ultimately generational effect. Kind of why that age group, and why is it so important that your kind of many efforts purposefully include women?
Well, that starts with the story of a 17-year-old wife, mother, and high school graduate. She only had a high school diploma, so she was only qualified to do entry-level work, and she ended up being a maid and a nanny for roughly 15 years. And that couple, once their kids got older, they didn't need her services, so they thought she had great transferable skills, and they offered to sponsor her and go into the community college to hope that she could work for them. They were both doctors. And she ended up managing 2 medical practices for them. Then she paid to get her own medical tech certifications, and today she has a medical billing company. And her name is Betty, and she is my mother, and she is the inspiration for Readi. Yeah. And you're clapping, but I guarantee you she's watching this going, my situation is not unique. This is a lot of people. But it's because
Hi, Betty.
Because she feels like that, that's why I started Readi. I want to close the skills gap for all the Bettys of the world. And we can't do that with traditional training. We need a high-tech solution. And it does start when we're younger. It is young. Youth are becoming adults a little bit earlier than maybe people my generation did. So the 16 to 26-year-old market, not only is that a federal government standard for youth, and there's a lot of funding associated with that group, but that's when they really need it. We have to start earlier thinking about career pathways. When we're waiting till they're 18 and they're graduating, they pretty much have their own mindset, but we need to expose them to more younger. So that's why we focus on this group.
That's great. KP, when you started kind of in on health in your work to ensure that there was not only kind of culturally competent and relevant kind of data-driven information that could be accessible to anyone, anywhere, whether here in this country or the other places that INON has worked. I don't think it was in your crystal ball that we would have a global pandemic. And yet, thankfully, because of all of your work, you were so painfully, because it shouldn't have been needed, but perfectly positioned to really help in your home state of Colorado with efforts on fighting back against vaccine mis and disinformation, and really helping to close and then later prevent kind of vaccine equity gaps. Can you share, since we all kind of have lived through COVID, though of course it has affected each of us differently, kind of your experience kind of with the work you did in Colorado, on vaccine equity and access, and kind of how that, because I know it has, influenced how you think about your life going forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Chelsea. So, I live in Denver, Colorado, and, also, as she's inferring, I'm a chair of the Colorado eHealth Commission, which governs health IT for the state. And as a part of the policy, we're focused on digital inclusion. And so when the pandemic hit, we had to think about a lot of the things that people were thinking about in communities across the country about our Black and brown populations disproportionately dying from COVID. And so, what we realized early is that the same approach wasn't going to work for everybody. And a lot of the way that the vaccine kind of discourse was framed, I feel like was putting blame on Black and brown people for not getting the vaccine as much as they should. And, we were really saying, no, like, you need to go out and be proactive because, these folks are carrying a huge burden in their community. It's not just COVID. They're single parents. They're carrying the economic load of the family. And, like, for us to ensure that they're safe and protected as public health practitioners, we need to meet them where they are. And so we launched a statewide initiative first on collecting information across the whole state on what the barriers were for different Black and brown populations to access the vaccine. So we collected that data, then we built a whole set of interventions from media campaigns with Telemundo and trusted messengers, all the way to, going door to door and letting people know that the vaccine was available, and if they had any concerns, talking to them one-on-one, right, about what those concerns might be. And I'm pleased to say that we really bridged the gap, particularly for our Blacks and Latinx populations in Colorado, with that intentionality. And so now, as we look forward, we're taking those lessons and thinking about a lot of things. So for example, from a state perspective, we need more diversity in the vendors that are doing technology, right? We need more diversity in the vendors that are doing outreach. Those vendors need to be Black-owned businesses, Latinx-owned businesses, like people that are in the community. And so that now is picking up beyond COVID into other work in the state, and we're really pleased to keep pushing the agenda.
Reshma, you shared earlier your experience running for Congress, and I am grateful that now there thankfully are many other people who are not waiting to be told it's their turn. They're just declaring it's their turn and breaking the mold of what kind of elected officials have historically looked like in this country. I wonder, though, if you could share a setback that you encountered while building Girls Who Code that maybe has influenced how you think about the work you're doing now.
When I started Girls Who Code, and this is for all of you in the room who want to build something, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never built a nonprofit before. I was not a coder. I was up against an industry that didn't have people who looked like me. But I was on a mission, and I asked for a lot of help, and I found people very early on that believed in me, like Jack Dorsey or John Legend, and got companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter, back when we liked them, to be a part of this. And so, but one of the things that when I built Girls Who Code, everyone would always say to me, I want to hire women. I want to hire people of color. I just can't find them. And I believed them. So I said, I'm going to teach as many girls as I possibly can, and then you're going to hire them, right? Wrong. A few years ago, I started getting emails from my students saying, Miss Sajani, I have a 4.0 at MIT or Carnegie Mellon. I applied for said internship at Google, and I didn't get it. And so I would be like, well, that's weird. And I would send the company an email and figure out, well, why didn't you hire her? And every response I got back never ever made sense. And one email turned into hundreds and hundreds of examples of talented, qualified young women of color, non-binary students not getting opportunities. And I realized that I was just too naive to think that like it was just about pipeline. The reality is that, the industry has a problem. It is unwilling to root out discrimination, racial discrimination, gender discrimination. They're still living in this, sentiment that they're really a meritocracy when they're not. And so there's been an inability to really root out the discrimination, whether it's looking at the way that they make hiring decisions, who's getting through the pipeline, and for example, almost 50% of women in tech leave within the first 3 years. So all that work that we're putting into the pipeline is for nothing. And that for me has been, again, in many ways, a big failure of what I have built. Because I need to basically solve that problem. And it's often why I'm actually building Moms First. Because I don't want to be put in a situation where, because oftentimes the women are not just leaving because they're facing discrimination, but because they can't actually be mothers and they can't be parents or caretakers because they work in an environment that has not been set up that way. Aijin talked about this. The entire way that we've built workplaces have never been designed for us. Even if you think about the fact that the work day is 9 to 5, but the school day is 8:30 to 3. It's interesting because as we've built these hybrid workplaces, they've been working for a lot of people. A lot of people of color say, I actually feel like I belong now. Mothers and parents actually say, well, I can see my children. But there's been a resistance to go back to that, to go back to the old normal, because I always think that we're trying to exclude. And so we are at this opportunity where we have to really fight and fight back. And so I've also been on a mission, you were talking about my TikTok video that you saw, to make sure that we remind ourselves, you're all good. You're qualified enough. There's nothing wrong with you. When the most talented, most qualified group of women show up, and we're still told that we got to take another class, we got to get a little mentor or a sponsor. We're told that we are broken when the system is broken. And we continue to buy into that till we reach the point where we just give up. We as role models, as people who have the mic, need to tell you the truth, that it's never been about you. But it's been about the fact that power doesn't give up power easily, so you have to take it.
Listening to Reshma, I was just reflecting on the rather ignominious set of decisions that the largest tech companies made a few years ago to stop publishing their hiring and employment data disaggregated by gender and race, because obviously it was not kind of painting them in the light that their rhetoric had conveyed. And instead of then fixing the problem so that the reality kind of matched the narrative, they just stopped sharing the reality. KB, you were nodding a lot while Reshma was talking, so I wonder if you wanted to share any thoughts or reflections.
Yeah, I appreciate you speaking that truth. So there's another hat I wear. I'm the lead for what we call the Health Equity Moonshot at Startup Health, and I'm going to share why, because it relates to this. So as I mentioned to you, I founded this company, In On Health, and just to what she was saying, the company had all the metrics for which I should have had no problem raising money. And mind you, my background and credentials, I've been doing this work, it's my life's work. So, I would talk to investment funds. I pitched about 150 funds. We had, over $1 million in revenue, case studies at scale in states like Colorado and places like Atlanta, all the metrics. And there would always be some reason that I was given to why it wasn't ready, right? And we were talking about this earlier, and then you find yourself, it's like a moving bar, right? I hit this metric, then I go back, and then oh, well, what about this? Or, oh, what about that? And I started to realize the game was rigged. And actually, that's how I ended up in this role, because I went to Startup Health, and I say, you know what? This is BS. I'm just going to say it. There's no way that I shouldn't have raised this round. Then I started talking to my other black and brown friends. They're all having the same issue, right? And so I think the reality is that, if you look at healthcare investing, from 2016 to 2022, 1.7% of venture went to black-founded health startups, right? Building on some stats from Elissa in the last panel, Rock Health did a report. Last year, 55% of white-founded digital health ventures were backed, compared to 24% for blacks. But they also track bootstrapping. 20% of white-founded health tech companies were bootstrapped, compared to 45% for black, which is just what Melissa's talking about. So in other words, the power structure still hasn't got its mind around the need for more diversity, equity, inclusion in our innovation space. And I'm convinced that that's part of why our healthcare system's broken. Because if the solutions that are being developed keep being developed by the same people, you're going to keep perpetuating the same problem. We need people with these types of lived experiences, with the lived experience that you guys bring. We need more lived experience in the healthcare innovation space, because that's how we're going to solve the problems and have more representation. But the power structure hasn't gotten there yet. So with Startup Health, I told them, you know what, I should just raise my own fund. And they said, well, why don't we work together? And so at the Health Equity Moonshot now with Startup Health, which is invested in 400 companies in 29 countries, we're building a whole structure with that team that's really digging into this issue. So we're looking at our data. We say that 30% of our founders are founders of color, 32% are women. But then when I go and look at who's raising money, it's still the same trend. The majority of people that are closing rounds are still white men. And so I've shared that data with Startup Health, and we're now building an intentional strategy, and I commend them for being willing to go on this journey with me. But I really appreciate you sharing that truth, because it resonates.
And Lisa, I noticed you're nodding too. You were nodding a lot while both Reshma and KP were sharing their experiences and reflections. So I'd love for you to chime in too.
I mean, they nailed it. They got it exactly right. So we have to play the game differently. And for me, that is using tech-enabled tools to help young adults start in front of the line instead of behind it. I can tell you that VR, there's a lot of data out there on the effects of VR and how it helps young adults, people learn better and faster, and they retain more of the information. So for us, it's moving people from the back of the line straight to the interview, and that is what we do. And you're absolutely right. This game is not for us, so at Readi, we started a whole new game. Yeah.
And how are you seeing the impacts of that, Elissa? Because I know you are. I know you're a very data-driven company. You're not just a tech company, you're a data company, and those two things are not always the same. How are you using the experiences of the now many people who've gone through your trainings to inform kind of where you're focusing your energy?
I love to tell about the success stories. One that comes to mind is a young woman named Sarah. When she found me, we ended up working one-to-one. She was one of the first students to ever try my virtual reality tool, which was during the COVID period of time, so there were no face-to-face classes. Sarah was 24. She could not read very well. That was her literacy gap, and she had 60 days to prepare for her U.S. citizenship test. And she honestly couldn't get through the first 4 questions. She couldn't read them. So we started working, both doing some literacy classes in VR, and then me working one-to-one with her. And in 60 days, she passed that test on the very first try. Yeah. So thank you. She was our very first case study of what is possible, and I worked with her one-to-one. So after that, I began to have small, and this was at my home because it was COVID. So meeting with small groups, and then I started deploying headsets, and letting people take my headsets home so that I could meet them in a VR space. So I'm able to not only help people with whatever their gap is, but also improve their digital literacies, their financial literacies, as well as their math and reading literacies. It's a new day.
I wonder, just in our last time together, if each of you could share kind of advice or kind of what you would like the students here to maybe think about kind of in their own lives as they're kind of charting their paths forward, Just what do you want them to kind of take away from each of you? And maybe KP, we can start with you and then come down.
Yeah, I'll just build on some themes as well that were talked about in the last panel, but persistence and patience are key. And I think I've been hearing such great engagement from all the CGIU students, and you guys are all thinking about the right things from what I'm hearing. So particularly centering equity in how you think about your innovations is key. And I think that's what's been missed by the prior generation. And I really believe you guys are going to be the ones to start to solve that. So I'm really keen to see what y'all do.
So I have 3 things. Number 1, once you finish your commitments, do not unsubscribe from the CGIU newsletter. Do not. There's a reason for this. At the bottom, it is gold. There is gold at the bottom of every newsletter. There are so many opportunities to network with CGIU's network. Verizon 5G has funded me. Venture Wales has funded me. I learned about them at the bottom of the newsletter. So, I'm serious. Like, do not unsubscribe. Do not say it's over. It is not over. They will continue to support you. Number 2, your commitments are huge. So you have to use technology to meet those commitments. In order to scale and really have the impact that you can have, you're gonna have to have some sort of tech-enabled solution. And number 3, build community everywhere. I expect a quarter of you to find me on LinkedIn. I am not big enough to have someone else answering my emails. I am the one responding. If you ask a question, I will get back to you. Build community wherever you are.
Reshma?
I mean, I'll just end by embrace bravery, not perfection. And that means fail. Like, I'm obsessed with Serena Williams, and she literally sits at the edge of her ability in a coach who says, do it again, do it again, do it again. You cannot be great unless you fail. And if you want to change the world, you got to be great. And that means you have to have experiences that teach you how to do better. The best thing ever happened to me was losing that congressional race, because I never would have started Girls Who Code. And then I never would have started Moms First. And so failure oftentimes just can't be a privilege for white men. It has to be a privilege for all of us.
Well, just amen. And thank you all so much. Thank you. Don't leave. Sorry. That was my fault. You just all awkwardly witnessed me running across the stage because I just was so inspired that I just was following in their wake, because who wouldn't want to follow KP, Elissa, and Reshma wherever they're going? And so I was following them off stage, and I should not have done that. Thank you all for coming back. That was embarrassing. But we get embarrassed too, and that's all right. Oh gosh, thank you. Oh gosh, thank you. Affirmations are always really appreciated. And I do try really hard to be an awesome mom. Sometimes that means, though, that I both get and need and want to be in places like this, even though I missed my 3-year-old's final basketball class today. Oh, I know, and don't worry, he made me feel appropriately guilty. And I've gotten many texts from my, again, lovely husband with various pictures of my son with a basketball and then his little medal that he got for completing the class. And I think that I've been sent 22 photos, which just multiplies the guilt 22 times. But truly, I wouldn't be anywhere else. And I am now so proud, as I always am, to introduce my father to share some of our extraordinary commitments to action of our CGIU students. So please join me in welcoming back my dad, President Clinton.
Thank you very much. I was listening to Chelsea have fun with you guys. And she'll get mad at me for telling it, so I'm going to tell the story anyway. When the very first COVID case was reported in China, before a single case was reported in the United States or anywhere else, I called Chelsea, who teaches public health at Columbia, and I said, how bad is this going to be? And she said, well, I'm glad you called, because I just pulled it up. I'm looking at it on my computer, and she said, it's not as deadly as Ebola, but it's going to be much worse than the flu. It's going to spread like wildfire, and we are nowhere near prepared for it. And the whole medical storage system you set up when you were president has atrophied badly, and I think the current government will deny it, that it's any big deal, and I think it's going to be just horrible. So I got off the phone and I said, God, I hope she's wrong. And I told her several months later, I said, you know, when you were in college, there was a brief period of time when you thought you knew more than your parents did about everything. Alas, it's finally true. So I'm very proud of her. I am here to give out this next award to the winners of the Up to Us Challenge. And I want to talk to you all about it a moment. Up to Us was launched in 2012 by the Peter Peterson Foundation in partnership with CGIU and Net Impact. It's a national nonpartisan college program that sponsors an annual competition to raise awareness of fiscal issues that nations face that also affect often their giving to multinational organizations that do things that we all want done. Students in Up to Us educate their communities about the growing national debt, which is now in America more than $31 trillion, as compared with a $23 trillion annual GDP. And it's the first time since World War II that we've had an aggregate debt substantially greater than our annual GDP. The student leaders who participate come from across the country in the United States and from all walks of life. And they have now engaged and empowered more than 500,000 students to work toward a more prosperous, yet just and inclusive economic future. Up to Us alumni have gone on to pursue careers as public servants, policy professionals in business, and a wide range of other community and civic leadership roles. This year's winners are from Stony Brook University in New York. The 4 students planned and executed several events on their campus to raise awareness about the national debt, its impacts, its potential steps to fix the issues, and how you change the public mindset, since we're used to worrying about other things and not money, at least in terms of what the government does. They held a community dialogue around the debt and the 2022 elections, and 2 letter writing sessions where students wrote more than 100 letters to senators, and over the course of 2 months, engaged 230 people through events, reached another 200 through 23 classroom presentations, partnered with 24 campus groups, gained 479 pledges, and garnered over 11,500 social media interactions. Why should you care? Because I supported the strong public spending, both after the 2008 financial crash and after COVID. Because when interest rates are negative, in effect, when money doesn't cost anything, it means that nothing's happening in the economy, and you can't keep an economy going, much less growing, unless there is major, major public investment. And if you're lucky, the return on the investment will far exceed its cost, plus the cost of financing the debt. That will happen in the United States with the infrastructure bill. It'll make us a profit. With the CHIPS Act, and with a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, because it's designed to hold down the price of medicine for big swaths of our economy, and most important, to invest in fighting climate change in ways that promote economic expansion and not undermine it. On the other hand, when you have inflation return, which is what we had, then there's always going to be a pressure to raise interest rates, which the Fed has done because it's the only way we know to stop inflation. And when that happens, then you have to service the new debt at higher and higher interest rates, and it costs a lot of money. And if you don't deal with it, then all of a sudden it starts to eat up everything else. When I became president the first time back in the dark ages in 1993, debt costs were about 14 cents on the dollar. That's a lot of money. They were bigger than all the discretionary spending in government at the time. And it could happen again. So the trick for us is going to be first watching how much the growth of the deficit will decline simply because of economic growth, because the economy returns to normal, and because you're getting a return on the investment you made. And it's kind of like a home mortgage. You get it back, the price of your home goes up. Or, on the contrary, how much the debt doesn't seem to make sense, and so we wound up not getting growth, and the interest rates start to eat up the things we care about, like programs for families and children and other health care issues. And it's going to be worth watching in America and other places over the next several years. If, for example, if the Ukrainians persevere and the war ends sooner rather than later, well, that will reduce inflation pressures. So the thing that I always liked about the Peterson Foundation is they never ask us to adopt reactionary positions and use it as an excuse to get rid of social problems. They just always ask us to look at the economic realities that a world with interest rates is different than a world without interest rates. And the public sector sources we look to fund things that we believe in are essential have to take that into account. So for example, this year, America's annual deficit will drop $2 trillion just because of the 10 million plus new jobs we've got and the growth of the economy. And next year, it's projected to drop another $600 billion. But if we have to make other decisions, are we going to raise taxes? Are we going to cut spending? If we're going to cut spending, where we're going to cut spending? What does the demographics have to do about it? What about the fact that we're not at replacement population levels? Our birth rate is way below replacement, and America has always done okay with that because we had a generous immigration policy. And I think we should again, but will we? And what's going to happen? A lot of you are talking about that now. It's another argument that needs to be taken into account. So I'm glad to be able to highlight the winners because they ask all these questions and they tried to deal with it. And it's something that all of us who are project-oriented would prefer not to think about. Heck, I preferred not to think about it. But I learned a long time ago that things I preferred not to think about may be things that I ought to be thinking more about. And, you know, so I'd like to ask the winners to come up from Stony Brook: Grace Armand, Timothy Giolando, Anastasia Poulos, and also one team member who could not be here today, Melissa Killick. So let's bring them up, give them a hand, and we'll take a picture. I also wanted to say something that you should all think about. When you have a lot of money, it's still important to think about how to spend it. When I left office, we had run 3 surpluses in a row for the first time in 70 years. And that's because we got rid of trickle-down economics, which defied arithmetic. And if we had stayed with that, then by the time the financial crash came, we would have been almost completely out of debt. Then after we recovered from the financial crash, if we'd stayed with the framework, we would have been headed toward being out of debt again, so that when COVID came and we had to spend that money to keep people alive and to keep the economy going, we would have spent it on a lower base so that our aggregate debt would be much lower now. I'm a Keynesian economist. I believe that you have to spend money when the economy is in recession, and you should spend money all the time, public money, on public problems that will give you a good return. And that includes social problems, it includes health issues, includes increasing participation in the workforce, all the things you all are discussing here. But in the end, you still have to pay for it, and almost nobody gets to do everything they'd like to do today. Some things you have to do today, some things you have to wait till tomorrow. So think about all this as all of you, particularly if you come from other countries and you're having inflation, what are you going to do about it? China is now facing the consequences of waiting too long to change its one-child policy. And there's a limit to how much you can do with artificial intelligence and everything else. And all countries will face things like this. So don't denigrate the role of the people that worry about where the money comes from and how it's going to be repaid and how things are financed. Sometimes how they're done really shapes what you can do. Thank you, and I'll be back in an hour or so. See, thanks.
Please make your way promptly to the breakout sessions. Breakout session locations can be found in the event app. Thank you.